extremely interesting, and I look forward to a fascinating week. So the talk here is a little bit different than the previous two talks, in the sense that rather than using AI, we are going to sort of doubt whether we should use it in some sort of blind fashion. So the title is about constructing and deconstructing trust in AI, and it's really my perspective as a cryptographer. So regardless of what we say, and regardless of whether we believe AI or not, or how well it's doing, or Daron's prediction that it's going to change the markets in 10 years, in Guido's talk, the fact is really that the last few years have proved to us that we're living in, this is the biggest scientific revolution of at least my time. It is essentially amazing what these systems can do in such a short amount of time, and how every 6 months a new version seems to incredibly improve on the previous one. And it brings up deep scientific questions about human intelligence versus machine intelligence. There are several projects out there. One of them I'm a member of, the SETI project, that are thinking about using these abilities like large language models to translate non-human communication. This is something that we really never dreamed of, and I don't think it's beyond, it's beyond the pale. People are talking about all the time, are AI systems going to achieve AGI, sort of superhuman intelligence, in all fields, to match sort of the best we can. There's a lot of betting markets on it. There's a very good question, how do you evaluate that? So there's these benchmarks that companies have come out with, or large groups of researchers have gotten together to put together, let's say, multiple choice questions in chemistry and biology, physics. This is a figure from a recent paper, like a few days ago, that came, or maybe it's a month ago, that came out from OpenAI, where they're saying that there was this benchmark on this biology, physics, chemistry questions. And to begin with, the GPT of the time was sort of performing at 39% accuracy, and the recent O1 has really jumped way up, both in all of the three categories, which was competitive math, competition code, PhD science question. And there's a new benchmark out called Frontier Math, which is just mathematics, where it covers very complex areas of mathematics, very difficult questions, no longer questions that they necessarily know how to answer. So because the question is not whether it can do sort of multiple choice where we know what the answers are, but whether we can hope for some sort of scientific discovery going forward. Very interesting question. They have some quotes from Terry Tao, who's actually quite deeply involved in using machine learning for advancing math research, saying that he's looking at these problems and maybe he can solve 33% of them. They span a large landscape of mathematics. So it will be very interesting to find out where it goes. Right now, the large language models can do like 2% performance. But we have seen that given time, and given this new idea of chain of thought, which is not so new. I mean, it used to be like if something happened in the last 5 years, you'd say it's new. Now, if it's 6 months ago, it's already old news. But this idea of sort of guiding the machines to have time on the task and to think more deeply has really gotten huge improvement. So it's very hard to predict what's next. So having said that, this is all deep scientific questions which are fascinating. We already do know that it is affecting applications, right? So you can do trend prediction of diseases, during COVID, say, drug discovery, obviously traffic patterns, and energy usage, financial markets. It's already being used, and it's already affecting the world. Okay, so far all I'm saying are good things. We have this scientific revolution, we're using it in practice. But the thing is that, it's a clear shift of power, and it's kind of an interesting quote to quote here. There's this British mathematician around 2006 that said, data is the new oil. And the fact is that, indeed, all of these applications seem to be due to the availability of huge amounts of data. So that holding data and having algorithmic expertise is obviously seems to be where the power is going to. And that means really that there's a big question here is we don't necessarily, these models that are being developed have a lot of control. And furthermore, you talk to AI people. I have these workshops all the time at Simon's Institute. They cannot explain to you why it works so well. So it's not very clear how this thing is working, and yet it seems to be performing very well. So now the question that I'm trying to address in my work, and I try to sort of give you some highlights in this talk, is should we really trust models which we don't understand and we don't control to completely change our lives? It's a good question, I think. Of course, everything happens so quickly in this field that it's hard to ponder this question, because by the time you're pondering it, somebody else is already using it. Anyway, so I'm a cryptographer, and this is sort of my trade, so it's what I know how to do. And if you think about cryptography, I think I've shown this slide in the summer school and so forth, and maybe even when I was on Zoom a year ago. When you think about cryptography, it's a bunch of tools: encryption, digital signatures, obfuscation, zero knowledge, and so forth. And they seem to be done by the by the same community, but they all address different problems. But if you zoom out, then all of them, what they do really is they say, okay, we've got this technology, we can communicate, we can go online and shop, but we don't trust it, because there might be adversaries out there who are trying to sabotage us, or trying to steal our money, or trying to find out what we're communicating about. What is cryptography doing is it says, don't worry, we are going to make it seem like the adversaries doesn't exist. We're going to put these tools in place so you can trust the technology. So it's sort of an approach to institute trust. And the work that me and my students and some subset of the community of cryptography is doing these days is to say, okay, there are some sort of machine learning trust problems that come up, and I'll show you some examples, sort of in the machine learning world, what is it that we don't trust? And maybe we can approach them by using a cryptographic approach. So some paradigms that we've developed in cryptography, some tools, and almost apply this kind of recipe where we will define what, I'm not sure this pointer works. Or I'm sure it works, but I'm sure I don't know how to make it work. Do you see anything? The screen will pick it up. The screen is diffusing, so it will not. It will not pick it up. Okay, good. So it's not my vision. So anyway, we will define some sort of machine learning task, and then we will imagine an adversary, that there's maybe a lurking enemy. Now, it's a very adversarial mindset, but I will argue that since we really have no idea what the situation might be, we might as well think that there is an adversary who's trying to sabotage whatever task we're trying to accomplish, and we will build a solution to overcome this adversarial approach. And then we want to really focus on sort of mathematics. So we don't want to just build a solution and then wait for somebody to break it. We'd like to have sort of mathematical proof that this solution satisfies our definition of security. And often in cryptography, these mathematical proofs use some assumptions, underlying assumptions, which is there's some hard problem for computers to solve. That's what encryption is based on. Or maybe there's multiple parties and nobody has complete control. So you sort of divide the control amongst them, and they don't all collude in order to sabotage. Or maybe there's some secure hardware. Okay? So this is the picture. We're going to I'm going to show you a bunch of challenges. I'm going to show you then how we might address them and how we might use what assumption we make to argue that our solution is trustworthy. Okay. And sometimes you can't do it. So then sometimes it's impossible to solve a problem, and then you should point it out. Say, this trust problem is not going to be solvable, and therefore beware. Okay. So this is just what I said. Machine learning was not developed with an adversary in mind. After all, you're just trying to make predictions. You're trying to solve problems. Why should you think that there's some adversaries trying to sabotage? Well, because I guess I'm of a suspicious nature and I've lived enough time, but really more so is because AI systems are such attractive targets, and taking control of them is presents such an amazing opportunity that you might as well assume worst case behavior on whoever is controlling them, and put in place some mechanisms to make sure that whatever it is that they might be after doesn't take place. All right, so the challenges I'll talk about today are three: privacy, verification, and robustness. So privacy, essentially, just in case I don't get through all of them, I just want to say what these three challenges are. So privacy, since the power of machine learning comes from data, and sometimes this data is actually legally protected data, like medical information, maybe financial information, and you still would like to train on it, we would like to be able to train while maintaining the privacy of individual data. Okay, so that's a big challenge because training is expensive. So to do this at scale, that is to do training on private data, is not a simple problem, but there's progress. The second thing is verification. So often, these models are not developed. So say I'm a bank, or I'm IRS, or I am, Abu Dhabi government, and I've heard about this power of AI, and I have a lot of data, and I want to give some expert my data so that they can develop a model for me. The expert is not me. It's a sort of a service that I'm trusting to give me a good model. So how do we verify the properties of this model? And there are many properties. One might be accuracy, so that it's a good predictor, but others might be, whether it's fair, whether it's biased, maybe there are backdoors in there. There's a lot of things that could the provider who designs these models can do, and the question is, how do you verify that they haven't sabotaged the model in one way or another? The last thing it's not the last property, but the last thing that I'll mention is robustness. So you're training the model on whatever training data you have. Let's say you're talking about, a health case. Let's say you're talking about looking at images of lungs. So there's clear evidence that images of lungs before and after COVID look very different. And let's say that you have trained a system that can predict disease by looking at, MRI results or lung or X-rays, and your algorithm works great, okay? But now the kind of data that comes up post-COVID looks very different. How is the algorithm going to work? So this is robustness through distribution shifts. So why do I think of this as an adversarial setting? Because you could think of whoever it is that controls these future data is controlled by an adversary. And in spite of that, you want that your algorithm would work well, even with this distribution shift. Okay, so these are three challenges. So privacy really is the one that, in some sense, is the easiest to deal with, because we have worked so long on privacy, especially as a cryptographer, I know the techniques. So so that will be the thing I talk about first. So again, there's a training algorithm, and it gets data, labeled data. So don't think about large language models. This is just a predictor. So you're trying to train a predictor. Let's say X is a bunch of images, and Y is whether you have lung cancer or you don't. I hope it's negative. But in any case, lots of X and Ys, which are the data and the label, and the training algorithm looks at all this, then compresses it, and it says, here's a model, I call it H. It's like, from now on, you can just use H, and H is good. It minimizes some error, and now this H now can take your data and predict the probability that you have a disease, you will have a disease, you'll survive, or whatever it is. So this H could be anything. It could be a predictor, it could be 0-1, it could be even generative AI. Okay, so in terms of privacy, what I want to do here is to, if we go back here, I want to be able to train without learning individual data. Because if I think about this as medical records. And there's lots and lots of works. There's lots of techniques. I think that Sandy also talked about some of them. Secret sharing, zero-knowledge proofs, homomorphic encryption, and so forth. So we have got a huge arsenal of tools to use. And what we can do, in fact, is something like this. This is, maybe people have seen this before, but I'll repeat it anyway. Let's just take all the data and encrypt it. So instead of giving X and Y in the clear, we're just going to give it encrypted. It has to be a special encryption function. And now it's running the same training algorithm, but on encrypted data. So it seems like, how do you run it on encrypted data? It's like garbage, right? It's supposed to look like junk, and you're not supposed to understand it. And indeed, you need a special encryption algorithm that has the following kind of property, and that is, if you think about your data as X, and the training algorithm is sort of doing a function of X, f of X, then your encryption algorithm has a special property that when you encrypt X, you are able to come up with the encryption of f of X. So you can sort of encrypt, you can do computations on ciphertexts or encryptions without decrypting them first. So at the end, you get that encrypted model. So what are you going to do with encrypted model? You want to be able to run this model, right? So you gave all your data encrypted. It was computed on, so there's a training algorithm, and now there's an encrypted model. So the next step is that you really want, let's say if it's a OpenAI or maybe the person who actually commissioned this model, that gave you the encrypted data, now got back the encrypted H, you want to be able to decrypt it. Now you don't want to have decryption in one hand, because then you've got sort of the key, everything relies on the privacy of this key. So often the solutions that we have is there's a bunch of key holders, each one holds a share of the key, and by collaborating, they eventually are able to come up with a clear model H that everybody can run. So what did we achieve? We achieved the fact that we got H without looking at individual data. What assumptions did we make? We made the assumption that the encryption algorithm is secure. That's based on some kind of mathematics, something called LWE, and that these key shareholders don't collude in order to reconstruct the key and just decrypt everything. So these are the assumptions. They're very clear. Whether they collude or not, it's an assumption. If they all collude against us, then we're done. Whether this LWE is a hard problem or not, it seems to hold up that it's a very hard problem, and it even resists quantum computing algorithms. And this kind of homomorphic encryption, that's what it's called, this type of encryption scheme, is now, there's open source, one can run it. It started, it was extremely slow, now it's quite efficient. Now, this is all, it looks like a beautiful recipe. Has it been used in practice? Because I'm a theoretician. But if actually it has been used in practice, especially in biological domain. Why in biological domain? Often you need a lot of data to get signal, and often it's called protected, it's PHI, protected health information, so there are privacy concerns. So here, for example, this is in the genomic area where you have sequences and you want to do genome-wide association studies, you need a lot of sequences to get signal for lots of diseases. And one of the first works that I was involved in, at least, was in 2020, and it's through a Duality company that I'm a co-founder of, was to do large-scale genome-wide association studies, but when the genomes were encrypted. And the results were quite good and seems to be able to extrapolate to very large numbers. Then and here you can also say that there are medical centers that hold a lot of genome data, that they themselves hold also shares of the key. So they will collaborate with others and then later can decrypt the results only if everybody agrees. Fast forward to 2023, now we are talking already about doing medical, rather than using sort of a randomized control trials, we want to use real data, real world data. So this is some work that was done on oncological data analysis. It's no longer like in the genome case where it's all the same type of data, you're just getting more and more by collaborating, but they're different. One medical center may have the genomic information, the other medical center may have health history and so forth. So you have sort of a way to join different data types together and analyze them. And more generally, there's lots of computations which are supported, which are statistical analysis, again, supported on encrypted data. So you can do all this stuff without decrypting. And then what about fine-tuning large language models? That's kind of the obvious question, right? We have these large language models now. We want to fine-tune them for our purposes, but we have private data. How are we going to provide that data and then get, a better model? And so here the problem is scale. These are huge computations, so it's not so simple, not so easy. And in fact, what has happened then is that people have been starting to talk about trusted hardware. So if you think about linear computation, logistic, and then going all the way to large language models, is becoming a bigger scale problem. And do I have 20? No. What is the time here? It just keeps counting down. I have 7 minutes, right? 20 minutes. Ah. Okay, then I'm going to slow down. No, really? Okay. Okay, so in any case, so trusted hardware has come into the question because it's just too big a problem then people have started to talk about trusted hardware. Trusted hardware, again, it's been around. I may have mentioned it in a previous talk. There is this NVIDIA H100 GPU, which where they write explicitly on the advertisement that they promise high-performance AI, confidential compute, inference, fine-tuning, multi-party computation training, and make it available in the cloud. In short, what this means is that there's a box where you can bring in encrypted data, then inside the box it gets decrypted, so there's a decryption key in the box, some computations are done, and then the output comes out encrypted. So you can use these things and put them together in a hopefully correct way, so that at the end you can guarantee that because of the security of the hardware, because this box is kind of a black box and you can't look inside, privacy is maintained. This builds on Intel. And the only reason I mentioned the previous hardware from 2015 is because there were a lot of bugs in this hardware. So it sounds good, but then people start attacking them. There's leakage of information, interrupt effects. So it's a word to the wise, you don't trust these things blindly. In any case, how to use it? So for example, there's a project now between Dana-Farber and MGH where they want to analyze sort of pathology slide images to identify cancer markers. They want to do it, but there's two limitations. One is, again, digital pathology images are protected health information, so you can't just give it to each other. You can't just all collect it and look at it together. And secondly, even if you just wanted to encrypt it, like I suggested before, and send it over to a central place to analyze, these images are too large. So the communication bottleneck is huge. So what can you do? So for example, in this project, one uses homomorphic encryption plus these trusted execution environment, these hardware units and together sort of to do some local computation in the different medical centers and then send updates to an aggregate model and then back and forth to get to the solution. And this is sort of a general, it's called federated learning. It's a general recipe, really, to enable to federal training, federal, what they call it, federal learning, but it's really federal training of foundation models and fine-tuning. So I think that is really the direction right now, is using the hardware and homomorphic encryption together in order to attack the scale issue. Okay. Let's start talking about verification. So, as I said, let's say that the model is trained elsewhere, okay? And now you get this model. What is it that you want to verify about it? So you want to verify it's accurate. You want to verify maybe that it's fair, okay? Fair has to be defined, but let's say it doesn't give you sort of very biased results. You want to verify that maybe it's robust to future data. As I mentioned, there's a difference between training data and future data. You want to verify that it's safe. So nobody, this is a big problem, and that will be my last slide to talk about safety. And maybe if there are going to be regulations, which right now is very questionable given the change of government in the US, but in Europe, there certainly is talk about regulation, that you want to verify these models satisfy the regulations, so you don't get into, even if you think from practical purposes, if you're a company, you're going to use a model, and then you might be sued because the model doesn't satisfy the regulatory, requirements. And all of this verification, of course, you have to do cheaply, quickly. I mean, you're not going to retrain the model, so you might have less data samples, you don't have that much time in memory, you might not even have clear access to the model. You might just have black box access. You can ask questions, get answers, but you don't necessarily can look inside of it, and because OpenAI or Google or Anthropic or whoever it is doesn't necessarily want to tell you all their secrets. Okay? So that's the challenge. You would like to verify these properties and probably many more, and you'd like to do it quickly. So I'll show you some new work, which I'm very happy about, which makes a little bit of a step toward this direction. So here we're talking about a slightly different problem than what I've mentioned, and that is you've all used ChatGPT, I'm pretty sure, or one of these models. And you've all found out that it doesn't always say the right thing. You ask Shafi Goldwasser, give me the CV. They see all kinds of things, who am I married to, but also come a little bit incorrect. But in any case, so there's a lot of facts there, but or seemingly looking fast, but they're not necessarily accurate. And that's even true about mathematical calculations. If you want to multiply numbers as you get to larger and larger numbers, it's just incorrect, okay? Still, these models give you some guarantee. So the guarantee they usually give you is on the average, right? So suppose we have this model I call P sub theta. Sorry, it's a little bit more mathematical than the previous talks in terms of the notation, but I'll talk through it. So let's say this model has 99% accuracy on a task. And this we can test, right? We give tasks, and 99% of the time it answers correctly, we're happy, okay? But then there's a specific input X. So like I request, now think about large language model. I want to find out an answer for a particular input X, and it gives me an output Y. And I say, well, this is a good model, 99% of the time it's correct, but is it really correct on this Y? Okay, the question I asked, okay? And the answer is, there's no guarantee. Maybe I fall in 1%. I actually care about X. So the question is it possible for us to come up with new models, okay, train new models, which don't only output Y, but actually give me also proof that Y is correct? So ultimately, it would be wonderful if when I get an answer, I get a proof that the answer is correct. Now, I think it's like $1 million question in the sense there's a lot of people who would love to know the answer. So we make a dent at it in this paper with the students, Noga and my colleague Guy Rothblum, to do that. Okay, so what is the idea? The idea would be the following, that we're going to add to this picture of the LLM, okay, something we call a verifier, a verification algorithm. So this is an external piece of software which we trust. Trust because we have, let's say it's highly valuable, so it went through, formal verification, and it's not controlled by anybody except for us. So it's like a saint, that's the yellow thing on the head. And now there's the question prompt X, and I get the Y, but it's not sufficient. Now I'd like to be able to go through it to get a proof as well, and we'll allow this proof to be interactive. So we allow it to be, sequence of questions and answers. So I ask questions in blue, that the verification algorithms, I get back answers in red. And at the end, what we will say, we accept Y is correct. Okay, we accept the validity of the answer or reject. And what we want to require is, okay, from this, is what I call soundness of this verifier. What does soundness mean? I want the guarantee, for some settings that's going to be important, that regardless of what X is, I will not accept Y that's incorrect. Okay. Now this, I could want it, and then it could be that machine learning just can't come up with proof. So maybe yes, I'll just reject everything. So that's not enough. We want also to be able to train models now that are able to prove their results, most of the time. So in other words, I'll never accept something that's wrong or with extremely small probability, and most of the time I will be able to indeed get a proof of the model's answer. So this is a wish list, and it turns out that you actually can do that. So there's a way to train models, okay, under sufficient condition on the task that we're talking about, and with a certain complexity, to do something that I call transcript learning. And don't even look at these details, but the main idea is the following. This whole power of these LLMs is, if you really abstract it out, and it's a little unfair because there's a lot of optimization and other things going on, but it's sort of the sequence model, right? You give a question and then they sort of predict token by token the answer. People have seen this, I think, time and again. So in the same way, and so you predict a token, then you go back again, and you predict another token, and so forth. So in the same way, you could, if you had examples of proofs, let's say, of certain type of mathematical statements, you could train your model to know how to predict the next step in the proof, okay? And essentially, this is how this theorem goes, and the complexity of it depends on the model, depends on the size of these proofs, and so forth. And there's some experiments where we actually get good results. Okay, I'm going to talk a moment about robustness, and that's going to be the end of the talk. So I mentioned robustness is this question about future data distribution being different. There's this paper from a few years ago. So, okay, again, the model. There's a service provider, there's a client. It gives you the data, gives you the machine learning model back, And from a few years ago, we had this work showing that if so desired, the service provider could put a backdoor in the model so that they can, in the future, tweak their, make sure, the backdoor will allow them to get other different outcomes from the model than you would normally want and normally should. So the example that we always use is there's a bank, or you can think of it as IRS, okay? IRS wants to make its work more efficient. They give all the previous audits and things they didn't audit to Google or to some other company, and they get back a model, like a brain, a machine model, which takes, let's say, loans in the case of a bank, or your IRS reports, in the case of taxation, and then they tell you, you should give this person a loan, or you should audit their, I guess it's a green, so maybe not audit their taxes. Or not, or the other way, don't give them the loan, okay? Wonderful, now I don't have to read it through all this thing, I have a model, it says good prediction, everybody's happy. The fact, so what we show is that if so desired, somebody inside of that company could keep a backdoor, which I see as a key here, which modifies the model in a way that it's going to be hard to detect, so that now a loan that should be rejected, okay, if you knew the key, you would know how to tweak it and write it a little differently, and a very small tweak, so that now it will be accepted. Similarly for like your IRS reports. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems very desirable to be able to do so for many, many, many applications. Okay, so how do you get around that? Can you get around it? So what we show first is a negative result, which is that essentially you cannot detect them. So you can put these backdoors in an undetectable fashion. Okay, it's going to be and this undetectability actually depends on, you could show it, you could prove it if some cryptographic assumption is true. So in some sense, you're using cryptography here not to solve a problem, but to show that some problem is not solvable, because somebody could sort of hide this key in there in a way that you will not be able to find it. And that's not good. It also means that after the fact, you will not be able to verify the robustness, because you just can't detect that there's a backdoor. And we just showed that you can actually plant one. But not to despair, so this is more recent work, we're saying, okay, so I cannot detect if this model has a backdoor. But, it's like washing your hands, I don't know if I have whatever those things are, on my hands, I still wash them, I hope it goes away. So in the same way, we're going to take these models, we don't know if they're good or bad, if they have trapdoors or not, but we're going to try to mitigate backdoors nonetheless, without detecting. So there's some new work with Vinod from MIT, and Jonathan Schaefer used to be my student, now he's a postdoc there, and Nikon, who's a student, which takes essentially the model that might be backdoored or might not, we can't detect it, takes the ability to sample some extra data from the distribution and washes it, sort of gives you a new model that mitigates the effects of the backdoor. And we can't do this in general, but we can do it when there's some structure in the ground truth that this model is giving. So here, I went from LLMs proving accuracy back to prediction models. So I'm going back and forth from different AI tools. And just the last, I think this is sort of my I have two more slides, is that I think this is ultimately what you really need is some kind of science, which I call verifiable data science, which is a way that while the trainer is doing his job, he should come up with certificates or things that can be verified so as to prove that their model have properties that are claimed. And there's a bunch of works on it, they talk about privacy, they talk about whether it's using the training data and so forth. But, a very interesting question here, which is not solved, is, okay, so there's data out there. Are they really sampling it in the way they should? If thinking about back to Guido's talk, there's a lot about how do you do experimentation. There's a lot of science about how to do that. But if you cherry pick, okay, then things are going to come out different. And we want to make sure that that's not done for whatever purpose. Maybe because it's a mistake, or maybe somebody has some goal that will be served by doing so. And the last thing is that I really think that a challenge that I didn't talk about, and it's the biggest challenge, is the question of safety. So what do I mean by safety? Safety, I mean that, here we have this amazing technological advance. We're all talking about it. It's only come up in the last couple of years, and it stands to have a lot of power. And this is just a quote that I saw in some recent Times article, so I borrowed it. It says, technological progress can excite us, politics can infuriate us, wars can mobilize us, but faced with the risk of human extinction that the rise of artificial intelligence is causing, we have remained surprisingly passive. I think it's an overstatement. Human extinction, but the power is clear. And the desire to adopt it is clear. So I think that one should pay a lot of attention to these models and how powerful they are and make sure that there's guardrails. And I guess one progress about a month and a half ago, again, I don't know if with the new administration in the US, whether this is going to stay in place, was an agreement between National Institute of Standards in the US, that they have a safety institute that they've put in place. And actually the head of it, of the AI part is Paul Cristiano, who was a theory of computing student at Berkeley, of Umesh Vazirani. And there was an agreement that they drafted with OpenAI and Anthropic that before they release a new model, they will let this AI institute look at it for a limited amount of time. I think it's a week or two. But even that's this big progress, that there is this agreement in place so it can be tested. Of course, the question is how to do this testing, right? So there are other companies that have come up that are dedicated to do evaluation and testing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the great presentation. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Shafi. It was really exciting to hear your thoughts. A question for you. You mentioned that the conventional thinking about this OpenAI and Anthropic and so on is that they build answers token by token, based on probabilities and temperature and whatnot, and create these trajectories, which, to my great surprise, have relatively low Lyapunov exponents so that they do not diverge exponentially. But I noticed with later versions like ChatGPT 4.0, my sneaky suspicion is that they stopped actually doing extrapolation and instead are doing on-the-fly search and then interpolation. Because, things like, looking at CV or your own CV, of course, everybody's interested. Yes, I did notice that, Oxford was replaced by Cambridge and this and that, but lately it disappeared because they actually go straight into some of the publicly available information and extract it from there. Don't you think that this is what's happening?
No, first of all, the observation that you make is very good, and that is that we don't know what's happening. But I think that, yes, one talks about going to databases, that's even, these RAGs, so it's part of the architecture. And there's a lot of human labelers in the process, right? That's not just a transformer, and there's an iterative process. And I think there's a lot of the chain of thought is come in, that's not just a basic transformer, and plus a lot of optimization. But even with all that, it is still the case that he makes a mistake on mathematical calculations. So, and those are just things I can check, right? And that's even for the new models. And that, I'll give you a 1 second story. I went to a talk by Andrew Lowe, a wonderful talk about sort of our perception of the market and how these tools can help people understand the market and sort of replace wealth management firms and so forth. And I was so excited, I came home and I devised this whole big plan of how to change something I was doing so to get lower taxes. It was fabulous. And just by using, ChatGPT, 4.0, asking questions, making derivations. Next day I call a whole bunch of lawyers to ask them if this is okay. Spent $1,000 just talking to the lawyers. Then it turned out there was some premise there, something about the tax code that they got wrong or they didn't know. So, yes, I agree with you that that's not how they work. That now they use more ground truth in some sense, access to verified information, but it's not foolproof. Yeah, no, but I agree with you, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Goldwasser. Emilio Porco from Halifax University. Very impressive talk. I was very impressed by your result about a lower bound for the probability of self-provable assertions. I have a curiosity. Have you thought about how useful those assertions are apart from being true. So is there any information-based criterion that allows me to select within a universe of self-provable assertion those that are really useful?
So, okay, so the theory, it's interesting. There's theory of machine learning and there's practice. The theory says that if you have access to these sort of transcripts of proofs, you can develop it with a certain number of rounds. In practice, it takes work, right? It's a task by task. So you are asking, fast forward, I don't know, X amount of time, saying, all right, let's say that we could do all this. When should we put the effort into putting these proof system in place, for which type of statements? That's already sort of a societal question, or maybe an application question. Maybe if you're in a particular sector and what you care is about predictions of the market or your health, then you should kind of pay attention to proving those type of properties. So it's selection, and then try to put the effort in that. The dream is, this is sort of an open problem, is that you would have a self-proving, a universal self-prover. So for everything, the self-proving strategy could kick in.